Right? Thanking and praising God for the way that over time He can help us to become more responsible. Let's title this chapter Knit and then subtitle it So That. The so that I want to start with because I might overlook that low key theme in this chapter as I begin to weave through the structure, at least the structure that I see in it. But the structure that has the relationship between the things that Christ is asking from God in this chapter that is roughly entitled or traditionally called the high priestly prayer. The requests he's making to God are going to happen in the context of what he is doing to accomplish the things that he is asking for God's help with. And in that, there are going to be purpose statements woven into his request and his relationship with God that are going to have a purpose of, among other things, to provide his people longevity. The love that comes from a situation where in life you can understand love, but you understand that there are sometimes levels to it. Understanding that love can be tough because it's not always easy. And he gives us the assistance of, as we've mentioned before, that portion of his identity that's called the Wonderful Counselor. And so some of the things that he is praying for that are also reflected in the things that he has done are so that his people can have a level of love that comes with his assistance. And with that, understanding that there are many difficulties in life. One of the so that's our purpose statements help us to understand that he is praying to God in combination with the example that he has lived out for his apostles and his disciples, so that they can have joy even in the midst of all of the adversity that following him will bring them. And so with that, the basic structure may break down into three components of his prayer as he is going to pray for himself. And I think it's the first 5 verses. In verses 6 through 19, he is then going to pray for them, or those who have been directly his disciples, those who literally walked with him, but expanding it out beyond those who walked with him and physically lived as his disciples. Verses 20, looks like through 26 are going to talk about his prayer for those who will believe because of the things that his actual physical disciples have done to continue his work after his departure. But within that, there is going to be what seems to be a weaving back and forth between his request to God and the things that he has done to accomplish his mission during his time on earth. And with that, let's just go ahead and kick it off with those first 5 verses that show us ending his comments to his disciples. Those comments that, as we saw in chapters 12 through 16, were designed to prepare them for his departure. Then turning his eyes up to heaven, he is going to address his father, asking his father to glorify his son, that, as we mentioned in some of those purpose statements, that his son may glorify him. Understanding that beyond his request to be glorified, it's not for vain glory. It is so that he can give longevity to his people in verse 2, entitled eternal life. And that's the biblical term that really just helps us to understand that concept that we have talked about from time to time, low key. The fact that we can appreciate success on our own, but the thing that's difficult to appreciate is longevity in success. Understanding that there are times in my life when I might have reached the peak of what I am trying to do in terms of accomplishing my goals, but as soon as I go home, the difficulties can set in. And so my joy in my work or my success can be short-lived, understanding that it's hard to strike a balance between achieving and maintaining joy in our achievements. But he is saying that in that whole concept of eternal life, it's talking about living forever. But it also comes with the understanding that as the Wonderful Counselor, he can give us a stability or a longevity in our success that it's going to be hard for us to produce on our own. And so when he is saying that he wants his father to glorify him, it is not so he can be happy. He's about to go be with dad again, but he wants his people to be able to have the longevity in success that eternal life is simply a representation of. Understanding that, yes, it is, as we might have already mentioned, the long range promise, but there is short range evidence in the way that, as we've said before, Christ can give us the peace that surpasses understanding, the kind of peace that surpasses or survives the difficulties that would justifiably give us reasons to be unhappy, no matter how successful or unsuccessful we might seem. Beyond that, he is going to say that he has glorified God. So as we said, it is not simply vainglory. He is matching the request with his actions. He's glorified God. But once again, it is for a purpose. He is asking God to now glorify him, understanding that he is no longer going to be in the earth. He wants to be restored, as we might have mentioned in previous lessons, to the glory he had before he took on the assignment of coming to help us out, leaving home in order to get that done. Now that he's going back home, as we've said from time to time, he has accomplished what he is going to do, even though it's going to go through the difficulty of the cross, but the difficulty of the stress, the drama, and the injustice he's going to have to suffer is going to give him even more honor as he goes back to be with the Father where he was before. But with that, he is going to say that his mission accomplished. Part of what he did during his time with his people, his disciples here on earth, is in verses 6 through, as we mentioned, 19. As part of what he did in his time with his disciples was to manifest his or God's name to them, understanding that one of our low-key themes is his name isn't just a set of letters, but it is brand recognition, or it may be likened unto brand recognition, understanding that most of Christ's ministry has been associated with helping them to understand his ways. Just as we said, one of the unique characteristics of the book of John was the way he goes out of his way to make sure that he helps us to understand that the things that Jesus did were not simply things he thought up, but even though he knew the Father, he simply did the things that the Father gave him to do. And that made him an exceptional brand representative, not simply reflecting the things that he was directly told to do. He was so in tune with what the Father had called him to do that he was able to move the brand forward, understanding that there were great brand representatives before him. Moses was notably one who's a prophesied to have a prophet like him that would come to be with the people. And so that's why so many people were confused, thinking that he might have been the prophet spoken of, the one like Moses. Even beyond that, he was coming in the line of David, a man who was described as being a man after God's own heart. And so those brand representatives were great, but they were not the Christ, and they could not advance the brand or the name of God forward the way that the Christ did. And so that is one of the things he did. He helped them to literally see what it was like to move the name of God forward in a healthy direction. So he wasn't simply asking God to glorify him. He lived that out in the way that he manifested the brand to those who were going to follow him and now carry on in his absence. Going on, though, he is going to say that he is in verse 9, also in verse 8, he has given them the words or the structure. It wasn't just random advice that he was making up. Once again, much like there was a law under the old covenant, he gave them the instructions that God would provide for them to understand objectively what it meant to be a great brand representative, understanding that his new law included the law that he told them after washing their feet. Love one another the way that he has loved us. Those were among the words that he gave to us from the Father. Going on in verse 9, though, saying that he is helping us to understand he is not praying for everyone, because not everyone is interested in the best for the others around them. But he is saying that as his disciples have followed him in his mission to try to basically reconcile the whole world to God, he is saying that he is praying for those who are picking up that responsibility to live beyond their own self-interest and likewise try to bring everyone into a proper reconciliation with God. And so that is why he is praying for them. And he is going to say that with that, with that in verse 11, he's going to switch back to praying that because they've taken on that responsibility, he wants God to keep them in his name. Once again, understanding that name is not simply a set of letters. It is a style of living that moves forward or advances the cause of reconciling us, flawed us, to a perfect God. In that, though, it bounces back to his responsibilities, understanding that he is not simply asking God to miraculously keep them without him likewise having taken on that responsibility. So in verse 12, turning to his responsibility, he's going to say he has kept them in God's name and he has guarded them. However, there is the exception of the son of perdition who was lost for the purpose, or so that in one of those purpose statements, the scriptures might be fulfilled. But in verse 13, he's going to say, now he is coming to the Father. Therefore, he speaks the things, once again, that the Father has given him to speak, for a purpose, so that, as we mentioned, the joy, or in some terms, the peace that surpasses understanding, his joy will be perfected in them. Understanding in life, we can have a temporary joy that has a lot to do with our circumstances, but he is not subject, or he is not beneath the circumstances. And so he is able to give us a joy that defies, as we said before, the reasons that we would justifiably feel down, depressed, or even hopeless at times. And so beyond mere mindless obedience, the value in understanding his words comes in having a joy that survives, as we mentioned before, difficult circumstances. Beyond that, he is going to say that, yes, of course, indeed, in verse 14, he has given them the word, but because they have kept his word, there are consequences, meaning they're suffering the hatred that comes from those who, as we've seen back in John chapter 3, who would rather allow their deeds, their shady side, to be kept in the dark. And so to the degree that he has conditioned them to speak truth, they're going to suffer retaliation and backlash from those who would rather keep their deeds secret. And so beyond that, he is asking his father in verse 15, to keep them from the evil one, understanding that we might not get to physically see the evil one, but those who are participating in evil deeds are going to bring a lot of drama into the lives of those who are actually living out the level of integrity Christ has called his people to. And so he is asking his father, as he is leaving them, not personally protecting them anymore, that he will likewise protect those who are legitimately, genuinely speaking the kind of truth that might bring them unnecessary drama. How do we know? Because he is going to ask his father in verse 17, as he turns back once again to the prayers. He has asked him to keep them from the evil one. He is going to call him to sanctify them in truth. And accordingly, just like he is not hypocritical in his request for God to do things he hasn't been willing to do himself, he is literally saying that he has consecrated himself, or he has devoted himself to the truth, so that he might set the kind of example that would likewise, as he is asking his father to sanctify them in truth, that would give them the strength, the wisdom, and the ability to likewise be sanctified in truth. Going on, though, he is, as we mentioned, not simply praying for those who were physically his disciples. The end of the chapter is going to turn the prayer towards those who will believe through their word, leading to what might be the most famous, if not the most dominant purpose statement in the chapter, a double purpose statement saying that they may be one, first purpose statement, so that others might believe that God actually sent the Christ. Understanding that the purpose is not simply so he can have the glory of being known as God's son, but so that he can effectively affect the reconciliation of all things back to God the Father. Understanding that, those purpose statements are going to reach back to his prayer for his disciples in verse 11, where it's going to read, "And I am no longer in the world, but they are in the world, and I am coming to you. Holy Father, keep them in your name, which you gave to me, that they may be one, even as we are one." And so likewise, in his prayer for those who become possibly disciples or believers through the work of his physical disciples, he is going to say in verse 21 that they may all be one, just as you, Father, are in me and I in you, that they also may be in us, so that the world may believe that you have sent me. Picking that up again, we'll say that in verse 23, that they may become perfectly one, so that the world may know that you sent me and loved them even as you loved me. Once again, he is not hoarding the blessings, and the love that he is talking about for them is not just an idle affection from God, but once again, it is attached to purpose statements, as he is going to ask that they be able to enjoy the presence of God that he is about to appreciate again, even though it's going to come through a cross. He is going to ask that even through their adversity, that they be as welcomed as he is back with his Father. And so even though they might have taken on responsibilities that leave them feeling isolated or misfits here, he is asking for God to assure them that there is a place where they actually do fit. And like it said back in the beginning, as he is asking for God to glorify him after a life that has embraced responsibilities from God that have come along with significant struggle and suffering, the glory that he had after accomplishing his mission, he is likewise saying after they have, as we've seen in previous gospels, decided to pick up their cross, there is a level of glory that he is asking for them to be able to appreciate as well. Understanding that in life, there are times when we can be so desperate to find a fit that we actually might find a fit only to realize that the role that others had for us can actually be somewhat demeaning or disappointing. The responsibility that Christ's disciples have picked up does not lead to that kind of disappointment in the fit that they have with God. But much like Christ in picking up his cross has led to a fit with God that does not disappoint. Likewise, the thing that may be most important about this prayer, at least for those of us who believe in God through the work of his physical disciples, the most important thing might be understanding that we not only have a place with God and a fit with God, but it is a fit that reassures us that we are genuinely loved and appreciated in a way that overcompensates us for the things that we have suffered and had to endure in trying to love other people, genuinely love other people the way that he's loved us.